Hello class, my name is Amanda Mitchell and I'm going to be presenting to you on Chapter 12 of our text, Traditional Models for Understanding Leadership. If you go to the first slide on the PowerPoint that I've attached, the first thing I want to talk about is the nature of leadership. The first thing that our textbook talks about is defining what exactly is leadership. The textbook defines leadership as both a process and a property, so both as a verb and as an adjective. As a process, leadership is the use of non-coercive influence to direct and coordinate the activities of group members to meet a goal, where leadership as a property or as an adjective is that ability to successfully influence those that you are leading. So to further define what leadership is, the textbook talks about leadership in respect to management. So we all know that leadership and management are not necessarily the same thing, but they do often go hand in hand. The textbook talks about managers as being more focused on planning and budgeting, organizing and staffing, controlling and problem solving, where leaders are more focused on vision setting and aligning people to that vision and motivating and inspiring others. So when I was reading the section of the textbook that talks about leadership versus management, I thought of the TV show The Office, and I thought that Dwight was a really great example of a manager because he's so focused on control and getting the bottom line of the work accomplished. And Michael, I thought of him as more as the leader. Granted, these are very extreme versions of these two roles, but Michael is so focused on inspiring and motivating his people that he sometimes neglected the day-to-day things that needed to get done as a manager. So the bottom line that I want to point out from looking at these two characters is that both management and leadership qualities really are necessary if you're going to be effective. You can't just have an extreme role of one or the other. Otherwise you're going to have a bit of a train wreck, kind of like what the show is about. So if you're familiar with the show, hopefully you can identify with that, and that sheds some light on leadership versus management. Moving on to the next slide, the textbook talks about the first early approaches to understanding leadership. There are trait approaches to leadership and there are behavioral approaches to leadership. And these two approaches kind of lay the foundation for understanding leadership. Trait approaches attempt to identify stable and enduring character traits that set leaders apart, where behavioral approaches identify the behaviors that set effective leaders apart rather than their characteristic traits. So there are three main behavioral approaches that the textbook goes over that I want to mention here. The Michigan studies sought to find patterns of behavior, and they were able to identify two behaviors, job-centered behavior and employee-centered behavior. Job-centered behavior has got to do with performance and efficiency, where employee-centered behavior is where the leader sets very high performance goals and then achieves those performance goals by ensuring that their employees are taken care of and satisfied and have general well-being. So kind of at the same time that the Michigan studies were going on, the Ohio State studies were being conducted. And they also identified two main behaviors of leadership, and those are consideration behavior and initiation structure behavior. Consideration behavior is a little bit like employee-centered behavior from the Michigan studies. Consideration behavior has to do with ensuring their employees' well-being, it takes their feelings into consideration, having mutual trust and respect. Where initiation structure behavior has got to do with the leader making very clearly defined roles for the subordinate and the leader, having clear channels for communication, and just really focusing on that structure of their relationship. The difference that I want to point out between the Michigan studies and the Ohio State studies is that the Michigan studies saw their two behaviors as two ends of one dimension. So on this end you have job-centered behavior, and on this end you have employee-centered behavior. And at no time can one leader be both. They're somewhere on this one dimension. Where the Ohio State studies kind of had a breakthrough in looking at leadership qualities. They saw consideration behavior and initiation structure behavior on two separate dimensions. So an employee, a leader could have high or low consideration behavior and at the same time exhibit high or low initiation structure behavior. So it was a little bit more complex and enhanced way of looking at leadership. The last behavioral approach that I want to talk about is the leadership grid. And the leadership grid is often used even today as a training tool in organizations. And what it essentially does is it puts concern for people on a vertical axis and concern for production on the horizontal axis. And then wherever you fall within that spectrum will define what kind of leader you are. In the leadership grid, the ideal leader is going to be a 9-9, so it's at the highest point between the two spectrums. So it's going to have the highest concern for people and the highest concern for production from the horizontal axis. Moving on to the next slide, I want to talk about situational leadership models, and this is basically the last half of this chapter. Talks about situational models, and these differ from what we've talked about so far in that they assume that appropriate leadership behaviors are going to depend on the particular situation that the leader is in. So the three main leadership models that we're going to discuss is the LPC theory of leadership, the path-goal theory of leadership, and Vroom's decision tree approach to leadership. So if you move to the next slide, the first one we're going to talk about is the LPC theory of leadership. And LPC stands for least preferred coworker. The goal of this theory is to evaluate the leader's personality in a given situation and then identify the leader situation matches that are going to give you the most effective leadership. So I thought that this theory was interesting in that the LPC stands for least preferred coworker. Essentially what it is they assess leaders, they take a test, and all the questions are in reference to the coworkers that they've had that they really disliked and didn't like working with. And the idea behind the assessment is that the answers that they give regarding their least preferred coworker is going to give insight on what type of behaviors they do prefer and what type of leadership abilities and skills they're going to be drawn to. So there are two main personalities, there are two main personalities that this theory of leadership is going to deal with in leaders, and that is task-motivated personalities and relationship-motivated personalities. And those are what are revealed by the LPC assessment. And this model assumes that whether you're task motivated or relationship motivated, that's going to be fairly stable and stay the same over time. The other aspect of this model is it looks at different situational factors, and those factors are going to be used to determine if your personality type is favorable or not in those situations. So the three situational factors that they deal with are leader-member relations, which has to do with the relationship between the leader and the subordinate. Task structure, which has got to do with the type of work that's being done, if it's a really straightforward task or if it's more complex. And then the third situational factor is leader position, which has to do with the amount of power that's inherent in the leader's position in that situation. So that is the LPC theory in a nutshell. And if you move on to the path-goal theory of leadership, this theory does not assume that the traits are fixed like the LPC model assumed. This theory focuses on the situation and the actual behaviors rather than on fixed traits. The basic premise is that the leader can affect performance by clarifying the behaviors or the paths that's going to lead to the desired rewards or the goals. So the point of this model is to help a leader identify what the best behavior is going to be effective in a given situation. So the 4 behaviors that can be used in this theory are directive, supportive, participative, and achievement-oriented. Directive behavior has got to do with the leader establishing structure, clear standards, and guidelines. Supportive behavior is whenever the leader is friendly, more focused on the needs of his employees and their well-being. Participative leader behavior is whenever the leader consults with their subordinates before making decisions and gathering that feedback and taking them into consideration. And then the achievement-oriented leader behavior is whenever the leader sets very challenging goals, but then encourages their team to meet those goals by showing very strong confidence in them. So those are the 4 different leader behaviors. There are 2 different types of situational factors that are reviewed in this model. And those situational factors are what are looked at to determine which behavior is going to be the most effective in those situations. So those situational factors can be personal characteristics or environmental characteristics. Personal characteristics have got to do with the personnel. It's got to do with the people that you are leading, if they have a high or low locus of control, if they believe their actions are going to have an effect on what happens to them, if they have a high confidence in their ability to achieve the task. Those types of things are personal characteristics. And then environmental characteristics have to do with the type of work that's being done and the environment in which it's being done. So if it's a really complex task or a simple task, if it's in a group setting or not, those types of things are the environmental characteristics. So those 2 situational factors are used in the path goal theory of leadership to determine which of the 4 leader behaviors are going to be most effective. So moving on, we'll talk about our very last situational model, and that is Vroom's decision tree approach to leadership. This approach attempts to prescribe an appropriate leadership style to a given situation as it pertains to subordinate participation. So the difference here between this situational model is that it just looks at subordinate participation. That is the one aspect of leadership that they're looking at. So it's a really narrow focus. It's looking at what extent the leader wants to involve their subordinates in the decision-making process. So in this model, there are 2 different types of decision trees, and the decision trees are what are used to help the leader decide what decision style or behavior they're going to use. The 2 types of decision trees are, there's the time-driven decision tree, and then there's the development-driven decision tree. The time-driven is for that quick decision that needs to be made. There's not a lot of time to really agonize over all the options. It just needs to be made and it needs to be executed quickly. And then the development-driven decision tree is whenever the leader says, I want to use this decision I have to make as an opportunity to pour into my team and to give them an opportunity to develop their decision-making skills. So depending on what type of tree they're going to use, no matter what type of tree they're going to use, there are 5 decision styles that can be the outcome of this process, and that is decide, delegate, consult individually, consult as a group, and facilitate. Decide is when the manager makes the decision on his own. Delegate is whenever the manager gives the decision and the problem to a group and allows them to define the problem and come up with a solution. Consult individually is where the manager approaches his team one-on-one, gets their feedback, and then makes the decision. Consult as a group is when the manager presents the problem in a group setting, gathers the feedback, and then makes the decision. And then facilitate is when the leader presents the problem to a group, facilitates their discussion, and allows the group to make the decision in the end. So those were all of the aspects of Chapter 12 that I wanted to go over with you. The question that I want to leave you all for discussion has to do with the path goal theory. I want you to think about all of the different leader behaviors that we talked about in the path goal theory and choose one of them, and then identify a situation in which a leader should use that behavior, that particular behavior, to achieve a desired result. So in thinking about that, it can be a real life example that maybe you've been in or you've been a part of, or you can make it up to just depending on which leader behavior you want to talk about. But as you're describing the situation, think about what situational factors make that particular leader behavior the best choice. So I look forward to reading your responses, and thank you for letting me present this chapter to you.